March 19th, 2003, NYC NY. March 19th, 2003, NYC NY. They say it's over. The need now is for justice, not for militarism, for humanity. We must be full of grace, or on the way there. Civilization must lead to something, morally instructive, dull, but stemming from universal rights, which mostly dealt, if I remember, with life, liberty, and the pursuit of property and enterprise. My Constitution, Jefferson, where has it got to? But we, who have created wealthy men, have financed foreign wars, buried our partners, buried our founders, when these did humble themselves for philanthropic reasons, an American gesture to assuage senility with the endowment or social program, who know our labor for bitches, we who have utilized the desperate in different countries and experienced great profit, have destroyed environments, settled claims, invested and borne returns, who have instigated revolutions, counter-revolutions, and counter-counter-revolutions, who have seen many systems of government and many a good venture fail, who have been at the docklands in Tokyo, in Chicago, and in Wall Street during the rally there. I speak figuratively. Who have seen assets deflated in Asia's centers and cast into the red, who have developed other countries as well as our own, have spoken and understood the language of progress, and have answered the call to modernity. We have something that cannot be taken away from us by an article, nor abolished by a critical agreement of United Nations. The searchers for justice will find that there is a certain humanity in the acceptance of profits. They rarely find out anything they cannot read in Marx or Chomsky. We'll start the wars. They will not fight them, but their children may, if they have children. So, why is it called March 19th, 2003? Well, that's the beginning of the invasion of Iraq. Isn't that interesting? We had the invasion, George Bush. There's this Onion article recently. Let me look it up, just to contextualize that time in history. Onion article, George Bush Jr. There you go. Let me see if it comes up. It might be one of the first hits. Our long nightmare. Here you go. George Bush. This is January 17th, 2001. So this is 9/11. This is 8 months before 9/11. So even before we had a justification for the war in Iraq, this is how George Bush Jr. was talking about. And this is satire. This is the Onion speaking. Bush, our long national nightmare of peace and prosperity is finally over. Mere days from assuming the presidency and closing the door on 8 years of Bill Clinton, President-elect George W. Bush assured the nation in a televised address Tuesday that our long national nightmare of peace and prosperity is finally over. My fellow Americans, Bush said, at long last, we have reached the end of a dark period in American history that will come to be known as the Clinton era. 8 long years characterized by unprecedented economic expansion, a sharp decrease in crime, and sustained peace overseas. The time has come for us to put all of that behind us. Bush swore to do everything in his power to undo the damage wrought by the Clintons' 2 terms in office, including selling off the national parks to developers, going into massive debt to develop expansive and impractical weapon technologies, and passing sweeping budget cuts that drive the mentally ill out of hospitals and into the streets. During the 40-minute speech, Bush also promised to bring an end to the severe war drought that plagued the nation under Clinton, assuring citizens that the U.S. will engage in at least one Gulf War-level armed conflict in the next 4 years. You better believe we're going to mix it up with somebody at some point during my administration, said Bush, who plans a 250% boost in military spending. Unlike my predecessor, I'm fully committed to put in soldiers in battle situations. Otherwise, what is the point of even having a military? That's satire. So when they say that satire can't even keep up with the Trump administration, this is just empire in general. 250% increase before September 11th. So we're addicted to war. The American empire is cannibalizing our nation from within. 6 trillion wars for $6 trillion for these wars. While well, does your local government need money? Does your local city do you have a town square? Do you have a civic center? Does it seem like we're prospering as a country, or does it seem like local municipalities have to financialize land use policies and sell out to big box stores, and small stores are closing down while big box stores and big retails and regular, basically the largest among us in this economy are profiting, and then small mom and pops like my folks have their insurance agency, they're struggling. It's becoming harder for the small businesses in our economy to survive, while the large ones receive the major benefits. So there's a shift upwards in power. And the same thing with this recovery. We had a recession, and now we've recovered at the top, where there's less and less jobs. I think like half of workers in the United States make less than $40,000. Where's all the money going? Where's all the power going? Well, the money is being siphoned from the Treasury into the largest companies, and the war industry has some of the largest companies. GE, one of the largest companies in the world, is heavily involved in it. How much has our tech industry, these new tech companies that have come out in the last 20, 30 years, how much have they been incorporated into the war industry? Amazon has their cloud service, which accounts for a huge fraction, maybe like a third, I think, of the profits, a fifth. But I read Jeff Bezos' book about Amazon, the everything company, and that was a bet that paid off a lot. But a large client of theirs is the U.S. government. I think the CIA uses AWS to host their data. Google, definitely, Eric Schmidt has been documented to be heavily involved with the State Department, and he's the one who helped Serge Brin and Larry Page scale out Google and become a global company. He's a guy who studies systems and hierarchies and how to build out a corporation and corporate hierarchy, but he's also heavily involved with the government. When Google met WikiLeaks is a really good book about Julian Assange, which is a great mind of our era, and Eric Schmidt, another great mind of our era. But Julian Assange definitely believes in values and ideals and has put his life on the line, and that's why he's been on house arrest. And now we just learned that the Trump administration has he's basically been charged in secret in the United States, and for some reason they let it slip out. I didn't read those articles, but you know the United States, that's just our MO, where as soon as we get our hands on him, we will call him a war criminal or whatever you call someone who leaks information that the United States doesn't want leaked, which is what journalism, I have him on audio in one of my later tapes saying the role of good journalism is to make people uncomfortable and give uncomfortable news, but he's being attacked personally for it. So one of the reasons why I'm doing all these videos is if I have the luck to have a platform and a stage to be able to get some of these ideas that are contradictory to the dominant narrative out there, and if I have the virtue of being attacked, at least I know who I am, and I can just not have these discussions, because I think they're a distraction. And just, if you want to know who I am and why I write what I write, hopefully all these videos, these over 100 videos that'll be out there, will be able to just go look at what I write, and they're all very impromptu off the top of the head. So why did I write this one? Well, this is another interpretation from Hemingway. I think he had a date there, so I decided to do the Iraq War date. Later on, I would walk in front of Nancy Pelosi's office in San Francisco. At one point in my life, I was homeless, just like recently I was homeless. I get so tired of civilization and so tired of the hypocrisy of our society. I don't turn to violence because that's not my nature. I was loved enough, and I have enough art and talent within me that I have other ways to express myself. But I can see how people, not to justify what they do, you never want to condone violence, but in order to stop the violence from happening, we want to give them better tools to express themselves, so that way people who feel like they don't have a place in our society don't have to veto it just with suicide and violence. I feel like these shootings are vetoes against society. So when I got to that point, I didn't get violent, but I went and I would be homeless, or I think some of the veterans do the same thing. Why are so many veterans homeless? So I was sleeping out of my car in San Francisco. And I walk in front of her office, just back and forth. I was going to walk the distance from the southern border of Iraq to Baghdad, the distance of the caravan that, when we invaded, we did this basically thunder run straight into Baghdad. And that's from the notes that I went over when I was reading a lot about the war. So the war, just documenting that as for the historic record is important to me. So here I did it as the date, March 19th, 2003. And then I read that Onion article just to show you in the modern era, this is just the level of hypocrisy and transparent bullshit is just amazing. That we had on the news, war's coming, and we gave them a fake ultimatum and this and that, and then we just went, and no one, I mean the whole world, not no one, the whole world was screaming, no, this is bullshit, and it still happened. And that's what's so dejecting, is when it still happens, even though the whole war is like, this is going to be a shit show, no, don't. But in my small town, when I stood up and tried to say no, don't, people honked and yelled at me. And I was in my full camo BDUs. So I was dressed as a soldier out there holding up the sign, and people were yelling at me. Because when you're able to push the emotional triggers to get the populace aroused, so that's a part of this discussion. It isn't just holding the war criminals accountable. It's to heal our society to the point that people can't push those emotional triggers. Maybe there'll always be that danger, but we have to create safeguards to stop this from being able to happen again. We, as a society, have to look in the mirror and be like, how were we manipulated to acting so much against our self-interest and against the common good of humanity, that we, the brotherhood of man in the world? How did we get talked into another genocide? Part of that has to do with not facing our last one, which was the Vietnam War. So part of it is not being accountable to the historic record, not having a true historic record. But part of it is our culture where we're able to just so quickly hate the other. It was too easy for them to get us rabidly patriotic and rabidly hating on Islam, which is still a strong part of the culture right now. So this is from the perspective of the people who create war, who, like George Bush Jr., we're going to have, I mean, even though that was satire, that's his attitude. We're going to have that war. I mean, why else would you increase the military budget 250%? He was gunning for war. The project for a new American century already had the invasion of Iraq laid out. He just needed an excuse, and that's what the indictment from other people who've already looked into this, and like Fahrenheit 9/11, is they were just waiting for an excuse to pull the trigger. It was an opportunity. They looked at it as an opportunity. That's on record. And Condoleezza Rice, and now they're considering her for what? The Chiefs head coaching position. Right now she's consulting for the NCAA. These people not only aren't being held accountable for war crimes, but she's given her opinion on the Me Too movement. We have Colin Powell giving his opinion too. Because look at identity politics. Look at black and female. And then George Bush is able to go over there and receive awards for being so good for the soldiers. The level of hypocrisy is almost intolerable. I smile and I'm happy because I love that type of discussion. I can't wait to get in and mix it up with these people because they have no leg to stand on. We have to get our group together of other people who also care about truth and justice, people who believe in honor and believe in holding people accountable. I have to find out where those people are. They might be few and far between now. I'm hoping that it's 10%, that I could find 10% of the population, and I think that'll be enough to start a movement. But we're going to have to figure this out. So let's see what their perspective is. They say it's over. The need now is for justice, not for militarism. This is the warmongers. For humanity, we must be full of grace or on their way there. Civilization must lead to something. Morally instructive, dull, but stemming. See, it's dull. It's dull to not have war. Because their view of history is war is unnecessary. Only the dead have seen the end of war. Stemming from universal rights, they're saying cynically, which mostly dealt, if I remember, life, liberty, the pursuit of property. It's actually the pursuit of happiness, but first it was property. But even the founding fathers, I hate that term, founding fathers. I already have a father and I have a mother. I don't need a patriotic version of that. I don't need more illusions to keep me from thinking critically about these people who instituted systems of oppression. Very flowery language, but it was just copy, advertising copy. They didn't believe it, their actions didn't show it. So they were going to put property, but it was too cynical. They're like, all right, let's do happiness. That word property is a little bit too much. But still, only property owners could vote. And some people were considered property. So the United States was really just a joint ownership corporation when we started it. An enterprise. My Constitution, Jefferson, where has it got to? Forgetting that it's actually happiness. But we, of course, the defense of those who own in society, who have financed foreign wars, buried our partners, buried our founders when they humbled themselves for philanthropic reasons. The real warmonger looks down even on philanthropy, an American gesture to assuage senility with endowment or social program. The real warmongers aren't even the Rockefeller industrialists. They don't even want to build libraries or anything. It's just fuck it. Life is all about power. And you see a lot of that in the tech companies too. Power for power's sake. Because our culture glorifies the worst of humanity. And in order for us to create different systems, we're actually going to have to fight this on a cultural level and have different cultures with different values, human values. So we're identifying some of the animalistic, worst values that come out in the dominant culture, and looking down on philanthropy. We know our labor for bitches. Fuck the weak. If we could take advantage of them, let's. Who have utilized the desperate in different countries and experienced great profit. That's all it's about. Have destroyed environments, settled claims, and George Bush Jr. selling off the environment. He doesn't give a fuck about anything except George Bush Jr. When has that man shown that he cares about anything except himself and corporate profits? And everything he has of any values he displays are values in the most cynical sense, just in order to burnish his legacy in. And that's why when you have people like Obama, when you have Ben Rhodes writing that book where George Bush Jr., they don't even hold him accountable for any of the missteps, or not even missteps, but the criminal execution of the so-called war on terror. And all Ben Rhodes has to say, and Ben Rhodes is Obama's main speechwriter who wrote The World as It Is. So his main speechwriter obviously has Obama's mind and values, writes a book about the Obama administration, talks about Trump and how horrible that is, and the Russians and the Chinese and the Russian Chinese. But when it comes to Bush, there's a little aside where Bush makes a quip about his last name, Rhodes, and the Rhodes Scholar, which is interesting. Ben Rhodes comes from a family of imperialists. So, of course, he has the right perspective, that elitist perspective that warfare and empire is the way that you govern the world. He says nothing negative about Bush in that book, and that blows my mind. It's like these are our supposed leaders on the left, and they have no perspective of justice, no perspective to correct history. So, settled claims, invested in born returns, instigated revolutions, counter-revolutions, and counter-counter-revolutions. They know how to play this game. They know how to divide Iraq. They know how to... Already you've heard it floated from the beginning. It was going to be a three-part country. They're going to have Shiite, Sunni, and Kurds in the north. And we've already long since been aligned with the Kurds. And so we got the oil in the north, and then Shiite and Sunni we keep separate. But we want to keep from a pan-Arabism. And when I read Thomas Ricks, that was the biggest fear too, is they don't want not just Iraqis unified, but the Arab states unified, just like we have in Latin America. You don't want a bunch of Latin American countries getting together to try to set their own agenda, because then we won't have a backyard anymore with our gunboat diplomacy where we could go down there and have our corporations tell them whatever we want. We've done that system in Latin America. Why wouldn't it make sense we're trying to replicate it everywhere else in the world? We're trying to instigate colonies or vassals and tributaries according to the imperial model in the Middle East. That's what our past plays out, and that's what it looks like we're playing for our future. Who says this? Who explains it like this? No one does. Our narrative has no room for an honest discussion of the truth. This follows historic patterns, and this is the best framework that we can fit modern history into, and yet we don't discuss it. And that's why we're just moving from crisis to crisis with no context. And that's all the news is. All the news is crisis followed by crisis with no context. There's no incentives to explain things. There's just incentives to buy into the narratives that are supported from the top down, like these identity politics or other stuff, or otherwise you're ignored or you're discounted. So if you care about having a career, you hold your breath and you say the things that you feel have social currency. And you claim that this is because they have social relevance. But no, it's because they're supported from certain levers and mechanisms of power. If you look into the consolidated media, you'll find the people pushing the certain narratives paying attention to certain stories, not paying attention to others, and that's why I don't like a lot of these people who traffic in these narratives. But this is just objectively the best way to explain the world: empire, profit, warmongering, because it fits the historic pattern. Who've seen many a good system of government and many a good venture fail, because that's what they care about. Who have been at the Docklands. Docklands is the London version of the Wall Street, so that's their financial center. In Tokyo and Chicago and in Wall Street during the rally there. Figuratively, they mean by money, of course, being silly. Who have seen assets deflated in Asia's centers. That's we had the tiger economies. I think it's Singapore, Taiwan, and South Korea. There is a maybe not Japan, but there is a recession during their economies. I think the 80s or 90s, cast into the red. Who have developed other countries as well as our own, spoken and understood the language of progress. The language of business is always a language of progress if you ignore their crimes of humanity. Answered the call to modernity. And Joe Rogan asking, oh, this iPhone is crazy. Imagine what they come out with next. Asking Elon Musk, what are you going to come out with us next? Yes, masters of business and progress, you guys are so smart. What are you going to give us next? Let me suck your dick a little bit more. I'm getting emotional. Let me calm down. We have something that cannot be taken away from us by an article nor abolished by a critical agreement of the United Nations. They have power. And they have they feel like they are the progenitors of the Western tradition. We are the ones who make money. We are the keepers of the concept of civilization. And their narrow framework is what we're all suffering from. That they're the pinnacle of what it means to be human. When really in the larger historic picture, we're going to look back and see that these were just monster men with monster hearts. These are cruel, horrible human beings. That's what the Me Too movement, the corporate movement, whatever you want to call it, but I do believe that women are getting together and exposing corrupt men for their corrupt behavior. I just wish that they would tie it into the larger system of oppression. If the men treat women like this, then imagine how they objectify everything else in their life. Imagine how they treat their labor, how the warmongers. Sexual harassment is terrible and rape is terrible, but war breeds rape, and war breeds the dissolution of the social fabric to the point that violence against women. That's why Howard Zinn said, in the modern age, war is waged against women and children. So if you care about female rights, then at the very top of your list should be war, because war destroys the social fabric, and then the most vulnerable among us, which are women and children, are the ones who suffer. So, but again, they want you to concentrate it on the granular and the specific as opposed to the macro picture, so that way nothing changes systemically. We're just going to replace the leadership with maybe a member of the victim class, like we replaced the white president with the black president. Now let's just this is what Fred Hampton said in one of my videos later on. He says, if you don't have education, the people won't know why they're doing the thing. And then before you know it, they'll be stealing the money. Before you know it, you'll have Negro imperialists. He predicted Obama before Obama came, and that was in the 70s. So, your identity, if you're not aligned with actual values and justice, means nothing. Then you're just trafficking your identity as a member of the oppressed class to become the new oppressor. That helps nobody. So he says, that ends, what is it? The searchers for justice will find that there's a certain humanity in the acceptance of profits. That's all they view the world, through this pinhole of profit. There's a tiny little keyhole through which they're poking at the rest of the world. And they're claiming that that's actually the promised land. And we're ignorant for not taking their view. I just had their view. I had their view to 5 or 6 years. I made $500,000 and making $200,000 a year. I had a decent life, and it wasn't fulfilling. So, I am a searcher for justice. And there was no humanity in the pure acceptance of profits. I need values. I need more than that. I need love in my life. I need art. I need to know that people aren't suffering because of travesties done in my name. That weighs on my conscience, and that doesn't allow me to sleep at night. I can't walk the path that I feel I should walk in life unless this is addressed. And so I had to turn my back on that. And that's why I've been doing this whole year. But then this is their response. Well, they find anything they can't read in Marx or Chomsky. And that's one of the reasons why I haven't read Marx. I read Chomsky. I don't really like where he leads me because he doesn't give me much hope. I feel like he's just a chronicler of injustice. But since he's tied into these institutions, there's this quote that it's very hard for a man to go against that which offers him a profit or something like his paycheck, whatever. But Chomsky is a part of the military-industrial complex, indirectly, if not directly. That's why when there's campaigns to ask for divestment from Israel, the same way that they did in South Africa to end the apartheid, which obviously, if you see what's happening in Israel and Palestine, it is apartheid by a strict definition of the term. People who've been through apartheid, I think even Nelson Mandela said, this is apartheid. Otherwise words have no meaning. These words mean something, and what's happening right now, this pattern is what we call apartheid, what's happening in Palestine. Chomsky said, let's not diverse, so let's not make the institutions and the universities suffer for the crimes of the Israelis. That's the whole point, is because these people aren't complicit. They're not responsible, but they're complicit. And so he works at MIT, and these universities are part of the military-industrial complex. And then also Marx, if Marx is relevant, then he's affected the world in such a way that I should be able to get his ideas without reading him directly. Now I'm at the point, if I could do heroin, I'm pretty sure I could read Marx. But I just wanted to make sure I had my own mental feet under me before I respect him, just like Shakespeare. Read him at a young age and I might parrot him, like a lot of the bullshit writing that I hear. Like, I'm reading Hunter S. Thompson, his political writing right now. There's this really good book that was just published in October called Freak Kingdom, F-R-E-A-K, Freak Kingdom, his 10-year struggle against fascism. It talks about from the assassination of JFK to the resignation of Nixon, and how Hunter S. Thompson was first and foremost a political writer, and then he started being more gonzo journalism to shake people up. And I'm trying to figure out what's my voice and how I could shake people up. So, but then I see how he worshipped the canon a little bit too much, maybe. He stole an antler head, or a deer with antlers, whatever you call it, but like, he stole a trophy head from the house of Ernest Hemingway, and then he later on killed himself. Not like Ernest Hemingway, he did it with a handgun instead of a shotgun, but he worshipped the canon to a point that I think it got in the way of his critical faculties. So I've always been wary of digging deep into the heavy hitters of the canon for fear of imitation. I've met people like that, and I think that I've always respected clarity of thought above anything else in objective truth, which is why I don't mind putting myself out like this, because if I err, tell me but where. I'm trying to correct myself the same as anyone else who's sincere would try to correct me. So any honest introspection into my life is welcome. But now, how do they leave us? We'll start the wars. They will not fight them, but the children may, if they have children. What does that mean? That these warmongers are so confident in their ability, as George Bush Jr. is. You see this arrogance at the top, which is going to be their downfall. That they've been in power so long. This is when I got into Toynbee and the patterns of civilization. Civilizations fall because the elite stop being creative in the response to the dangers that the civilization face, and instead they start worshiping versions of themselves. And that's what you see. These guys just, George Bush Jr. emulating his father, and we're getting more and more replicas of a replica of a replica of empire, that even when we see how they execute empire, they're not executing empire right. Whether you agree with the imperial wars or not, they're not even conducting them in accordance to the strategy of how you conduct imperial wars against insurgencies. Maybe because back in the day we were cynical enough to have racism and these other excuses at the forefront. We don't have those excuses now, so you need more duplicity of motives, and you need more bullshit, hypocrisy, and cynicism, because we don't have big excuses to just be savage against other fellow humans. But that cuts down on the efficiency. So we're just becoming replicas of monsters. These aren't even real monsters anymore. They're imitation monsters, which is almost even more disrespectful. We're not even being governed by monster men. We're being governed by cartoons. And now we have Trump, the biggest cartoon of them all. Or even Obama, a con man, who hope and change is what he ran on. What did he offer us? And then he even tries to defend his health care package and then blames the Republicans for not letting that through. It's such a small fraction of actual social change. And then he claims that we're supposed to feast on this small little morsel, this breadcrumb of justice, which he offers to us, that you can keep your health insurance plan if you have a pre-existing condition. That's another small little keyhole through which to view the world, while the rest of the world's going to hell, and while he institutes a disposition matrix, a kill list where he claims America has the right to kill anyone in the world at any time, for any reason, in secret through an army of drones. Robot army that could extrajudiciously kill anyone. And he definitely didn't roll back George Bush's policy where you can detain anyone, even a U.S. citizen. So these people are doing nothing for us except throwing us scraps in order to shut us the fuck up. And their condescension just reeks. Well, they'll start the wars. It's okay if you decide not to be in the military like myself or someone else to actually fight. Most of the people come from the heartland, from poverty families. But even if you don't, your children will fight him, because these wars will still be going on when your children are alive. Think about it. We invaded Iraq in 2003, and now our children. So I'm 36, so I'm old enough to have children. If I had had a kid when I was 22, my kid would be 14. In 4 more years, he can go and sign up and fight this war. And this is 10 years ago, but just saw the writing on the wall. This is a long war that we're in against these instigators, these warmongers, war profiteers. And this is their view, that they're not going to be dislodged easily. They believe that it's their right to lead society through this cycle of violence and perpetual war. And why do you even care about your children fighting our wars? Because, as they'll tell us, you don't even believe in children. Because their condescension is such that you're just a guy who reads Chomsky or Marx, or you don't even... and that's what I'm trying to get at when I'm looking back at my past and when I wrote all this stuff. It's like, this is a big reason why I didn't commit to a career or a relationship or this and that. How can you with this type of injustice? I have work to do, and I've just been all my life trying to figure out how to best execute that work. And this is what's reminding me. This is the reason why I've put off a lot of things in my life. And it's refreshing, because there's a reason why I am who I am, and I've done what I've done. And you can forget that sometimes, and that's a little scary. So art reminds you who you are. And I am the person who opposes the person in this poem. That's who I am.